ID followed by pound.
325. And do a pound.
Enter your participant ID followed by please enter the meeting password followed by. You are in the meeting now. There are 2 participants in the meeting. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing star
Now we can
6,
turn it
star
down. Now we
6,
can turn it
star
down. Now we
6,
can turn it
star 6, star 6, star 6, star 6.
He's a struggle bus.
All ready to go? 4:59 on my clock there.
In about 6 months, that clock will be right.
That'll be right.
Then we'll, yeah. Valid, there we go.
Okay. Go ahead and get started. Work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there's generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings. First item is to discuss the formal agenda. We've all had an opportunity to review the agenda. Any questions, comments? Seeing anything? Okay, we'll conclude our discussion. We'll move on to the first item. That's the ARPA funding concept plan update on page 3. And I'll turn it over to our county manager, Don Boone.
Good evening, Chair Cuerlo, members of the board. Just wanted to bring the ARPA concept funding plan back to your board. As you will recall, this is money that came out of COVID funding from the federal government. The county received about $7.8 million, and it can be used for a number of different types of expenditures, which included impacts related to COVID, and that can be generally economic impacts. It can be public health impacts, infrastructure impacts. And then as we've gone on, it's become even broader in some of the defined uses. All the uses that the county has identified are consistent with the ARPA legislation. And what I thought I would do is just to walk through these one section at a time, kind of remind the board what we set aside the money for and a little bit about where we are, and then answer any questions. And then we do have a number of additional requests for ARPA funding that I'll talk about at the very end. And we have more additional requests than we have resources, so isn't that a common ailment? So I'm just going to start at the top and just go by. Feel free to ask questions as we go. The first item was set aside for economic development. And what we have done is we've identified that really for the SBDC funding. This is funding that the board approved last year. Kevin Leahy from Cedar came in, and part of COVID was obviously small businesses were very stressed, and SBDC took a very visible role in supporting businesses through the pandemic, and now continuing to support them as they exit the pandemic. And so the board had agreed to really fund $120,000 in the out years for the SBDC. We did spend $40,000 for the Eco Northwest study on the transient lodging tax. And then there was a small amount, $2,500, that went into the fermentation study that was done as part of a partnership with a number of other contributors. So that's the economic development efforts at this point for 23-24, and for 24-25, we assume $120,000 to the SBDC program. The second item was childcare, and we do have a total of $500,000 that's been set aside as part of the plan. $200,000 has been expended for the first year of the child care task force work, and we have $150,000 set aside for 23-24 and 24-25 for that total of $500,000. And that will just go to the continued work of the task force and of the community college. So the next one's the navigation center, and I'm going to let Monica, we're going to tag team on some of these. I'll let Monica take some of the more health and human service-based ones.
So in fiscal year 21-22, we did $70,000 initially, and that's specific to navigation services. And so, for example, Helping Hands provides navigation services, and so does Lifeboat Services. And so we have not allocated any in this current fiscal year. Because we've been trying to figure out what some of the programs have going on, because there's been a lot of different things developing. And so at this point in time, we have $50,000 allocated or dedicated for this, but we haven't distributed any of the funds. And so looking out into fiscal year 23-24 and 24-25, we're also going with that $50,000. In regards to emergency shelter support system, same sort of thing we allocated last year, and that was for Helping Hands, Astoria Warming Center, and the Harbor. And then this year we have not allocated anything because of Project Turnkey and because of the Warming Center. So still trying to figure out some of that, but we have put down for this fiscal year as well as the next two, $300,000 there. Other nonprofit support, that was distributed to Clatsop Community Action for a number of things that they were working on. We have 22-23, $100,000 dedicated, but not yet distributed. And then in the future years, we have $50,000 set out there as well. And I apologize, I do need to correct. In the current fiscal year, 22-23, we did allocate $50,000 of that other nonprofit support for the homeless liaison. That is something the last couple years that's been budgeted in the general fund, but we have used ARPA monies this year to kind of help offset the general fund costs. And then in the mental health crisis response, that is specific to CDH. And so this current year, we have provided them with those funds. They've added additional mobile crisis response clinicians to help with that. And in 23-24, we're also allocating $160,000, and then 24-25, it goes back down to $80,000. The enhanced mental health services in the jail, in this current year, the sheriff, in talking with him, has had a difficult time trying to find clinicians to be able to provide this, and getting things up and running was something he was waiting for the new jail to happen. So we reduced that amount in this current year to $25,000, and that has been transferred to them. And then in the next 2 years, we're looking at $88,800 to provide that additional support. And then I'm going to turn this back over to Dawn to talk about the housing.
So on the housing side, one of the contemplations that we had was to invest in NOHA staff as a means for the county to benefit from a reinforced staffing level with our local housing authority. And so we did enter into an agreement with NOHA. The first year's payment has been made, and as a result, they have hired a deputy director, property manager, and so this plan would continue those investments over the next 2 fiscal years. I think the biggest point there is just the stronger NOAA is, the better the county is in meeting the countywide housing needs. And so I think that is important as we move forward. The other is that we set aside $350,000 for pre-development grants for new developments. We haven't spent any of this money yet, but there are some potential requests for this money that will be coming. And so we know that money will be spent. And as there's more affordable housing projects, the need for pre-development money will continually grow. The pre-development money just is what it gets a project off the ground to see if it's even feasible prior to actually securing long-term financing. So is there any questions about that portion? So far to date, we have spent about $1 million in that subset area, and we anticipate spending all of that money because, as we know, one of the unknowns and uncertainties still is Project Turnkey. We're still working through the operating side. We are asking the legislature to help us with those ongoing operating costs, and certainly both CCA and the harbor will be bringing their own resources too, but it's uncertain what that's going to mean long term.
Commissioner Banger.
It's not so much of a question, but just looking at the numbers and everything, I know firsthand what the child care initiatives have brought to the community, or what these dollars actually turned into out into the community. And I'm looking at the numbers for CBH and so on and so forth, and I'd just be interested to know what the direct impact or the direct result would be of those dollars. Was it increased capacity? Was it increased services? What it directly correlated to you? And it's not a conversation for today so much as that when we come back, it would be nice to, I know our child care, Mr. Gaffney came and did a presentation, and we are all aware of what that funding resulted in. I'd just be curious to see, and I understand what SBDC's funding resulted in, just because of my involvement there, but I don't have quite the same grasp of, say, how the funding resulted with CBH or, and you just informed us of the NOHA capacity increase and the person hired. So I guess I just would like to see the bigger picture, and it doesn't have to be in a presentation so much as maybe just materials of direct results, because my curiosity is when this funding dries up, what's going to happen to all of these people hired? Where is the additional funding going to come from? How are these entities going to support the increase in capacity that has been developed? Does that make sense?
Yes, and what I would say is those are conversations that we've had with these agencies too. In some regards, we were trying to move the ball on a community need, knowing that we would hope that there would be additional legislative priority, which there is a lot of conversation about legislative funding for both housing, obviously, homelessness, and on the behavioral health side. So I think that we're all hoping that that those investments are actually made. But yes, we can provide some additional information. On the CBH side, just as a little overview, that was to actually put clinicians in the vehicle so that they could respond if there was a mental health issue to help law enforcement. And so, but we can certainly do that. I think plan to do a more robust presentation, but with our staffing challenges right now, we're unable to do that. But we will certainly follow up with that.
Oh,
I was just going to say, and I appreciate our staffing capacity right now ourselves, and it's not a critique so much as I really am curious how this is going to play out in 2025, 26.
and I can just say that it was an additional 2 clinicians to kind of go along with the CAHOOTS model. And so that's where they are looking at, because that is something that legislation is pushing, that additional funding support there.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I just want to dovetail. This is flowing nicely. Splicing, right? So when we look at our strategic plan, there are certain things that are visible, whether it's ours or, for example, the port. With the port, it's easy to see. Look, there's grumbling infrastructure. Pieces of things are falling off into the river. So that's visible. It's material. What I see in these data are, we've had missing infrastructure. We've had missing services, and we're not the only ones. But as you good to point out to me, County Manager, we're doing a pretty good job as a board and as a county to look at what was missing, what had been missing, and to spend money strategically for impact now that will carry on later. I mean, we've talked about how do we do economic development? How do we deal with climate change? Those are the big issues that I see that will impact the ongoing results of these investments. And so, in my mind, Commissioner Banks is asking to have us fold into strategic planning our hopes for how these investments will dovetail. And again, staff understood, but maybe we can at least talk about it so we can contemplate it and communicate it to the community so that people understand, we're trying to deal with a big picture with all of the systems and how they interact. We've made these particular investments. We see they're going forward. The sale of the North Coast Business Park, I mean, all of the other economic development things that we're doing, that's part of it. The other part is the political aspect, because everybody here pays taxes. When it goes out, what money comes back? So the work that we've been doing with PacWest, the work that you've been so supportive of to go through AOC, watching how we can get access to the state and federal monies, those earmark they call them congressionally directed spending, and what is it on the House side? It was anyhow. We are getting more fluent in the conversation about bringing resources back into Clatsop County because we don't have enough money right now to do all these things. How do we get the staff so we can ask for the money, then use the money, then grow the tax base so that we can go forward and address everything that's in this? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Commissioner Toyoka?
Just on the housing, line items, and in the capacity, and went to the Housing Development Funding Forum last week. We're looking at different projects, and they're evaluating, and you look at some of the private enterprise projects, and value there. But the one area of concern I have is in a lot of the supportive housing projects. Relying upon the ARPA funding, relying upon different funding sources to initiate and provide, initial support for those programs. Down the road, where does that funding? We're relying upon all these different things, and we're growing. where does the funding come from without accumulating more taxes, without, accumulating more of a greater burden. So I think that's something we have to look at too, is what burden, how many projects do we support to look at the future burden. I would, there's more of the private enterprise, more of that, off the county's books, off the taxpayers, provide the same services, yet not make it a burden to the taxpayer.
Commissioner Webb has comments.
Well, I think we're doing a lot of work in the legislature on that behalf. And I think that the state has finally come to the table and said, we realize that local governments need help. And a lot of the lobbying that we're doing in the legislature has to do with that. And it's very specific.
A lot of that is pointing towards off the books, private enterprise, keep it.
Really? You let me know when you see that happen, all right?
We need to.
Oh, really? Well, good. That's.
Well, sidestepping that discussion, how about if I slide into something else? We've been talking about the coordinated care organization, and because that's money that's already in play. So I keep looking to how do we get impact? And it's, remember reading the fairy tales when you were little about the hero trying to climb the glass mountain? It's kind of like climbing the glass mountain, but I think if we hold it in our awareness, and Mimi Haley has said that she's interested in engaging some conversations with us. Okay, so that's a little opening. How does the board of the CCO, or how does OHA, or how does the local government advisory committee at AOC, how do all of these, where are the pressure points? Because Commissioner Toyoka, if we could have private enterprise be able to step up and do it, oh baby, I would be for that. In the meantime, let's do what we can to get our legitimate share and voice and vote in the distribution of that share as we address these needs.
I agree. As I say, we're relying heavily on one source. We need to start moving it off the one plate and off the burden.
Oh, good discussion.
Ready for me to move on?
Yep.
So, and I am going to talk about another investment that's been requested as part of supporting the city that wants to see development more on the private side. But so the next little grouping, it begins with public health infrastructure. Obviously, one of the priorities of the COVID money was to help us reinforce the capacities and the resources within the public health department. I think, and I do give our public health department, our emergency management folks, all of our staff, the board, a lot of kudos for how we got through the pandemic with our partners and our 400 plus volunteers. But the reality is that rural counties are not particularly well positioned to deal with pandemics. And so we've been investing in that infrastructure, and that's been at the tune of $375 one year, and then $350 in other years, for a total of $1.4 million. And again, the plan there is that there is more funding coming from the state and from the federal government for public health. And so what we hope is that the investments we make will still be paid for by the main contributors of public health, which is really the state. So the next one is county facility space planning. We have finished that project, and your board has seen the strategic facilities plan, and we will be interviewing architects in a week or so to actually start executing that plan. But that was $150,000 that I think was really well spent. And then the next is the emergency preparedness resiliency. There's been a few projects that we have been funding out of these resources. One was part of the 911 consolidated study that was done, looking at our communications infrastructure. And then the other is that we are responsible for a communication tower that is the emergency broadcasting. And so we replaced are replacing the generators for that tower for resiliency purposes. And so those are some of the projects that were being used for that portion of the resources. And to date, we spent, just under $1 million on those projects, and there will be more. There'll be a total of 1.663 spent over the next couple of years. Any questions about those three? No questions about those? Okay.
I guess,
Ms. Webb?
yeah, I do. Are we going to see some kind of a work plan for after our, we've seen the facilities recommendations. Are we going to see some kind of a scope of work for what the timing is going to be on this?
Yeah, so one of the first, yes, Commissioner, thank you. One of the first efforts will be to develop kind of the work plan schedule, because there's a lot of staging, and we have to really decide how much and when, and part of that is to figure out how big of an effort is it going to take to kind of remodel the Duane Street Annex to be used for some offices. And of course, there is a realistic approach to that project that we're going to take. And so yes, we'll be coming back to your board as soon as we can work through that.
Because that is something that I do think we're probably going to get some public comment about, and it'd be really nice to be able to know and be able to tell people. Main Street Annex is one of the great euphemisms of all time.
We can come up with a better. And then I'm going to get into some of the more meaty ones that we haven't had full resolution on with this last group. And the first, at the top of the last group, is the Rural Internet Communications Accessibility and Enhancement Project, which that is really the Jewel Pine Maple LC Internet project. As you will recall, there was a contract between the Jewel School District and Tillamook. I'm trying to remember what the name of the company is. I don't think it was Tillamook Lightwave. It was, so there's a company that the school district contracted with. There was a change in leadership at the school district. And the way that it was originally envisioned is that the school district was going to own the communication towers, and they were going to project manage and be the administrative home for this project. And the county was just one of the funders of it. Due to a leadership change, the school district decided they didn't want to play those roles. The problem has been is there is a contract between the provider and the school district. And so county council, myself, many others, Commissioner Thompson, have been involved in meetings to try to figure out what the next steps are and to try to help them untangle this. But at this point, we still don't have a concrete path forward. And so there is $1.2 million plus that we haven't spent. It says that we did spend $525. 25 of that, I'm trying to figure out. The 25 was for Colpack did a broadband study, and then we transferred $500,000 to the school district. They haven't spent that. There's probably, I think they spent around $90,000, if I'm not mistaken. So there's money there. We just haven't had it transferred back until they can resolve the contractual issues with the provider. So, I'm still hopeful that we can move this project forward. It's just taking a little bit longer than any of us anticipated. So,
Mr. Thompson.
I'd love the county manager and everyone involved in this project, because it is, it's a gnarly thing. And I'm absolutely behind you. I'm delighted my colleagues have seen fit to support this project as well. We continue to keep the faith, and it's not done yet. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So the next one was a water assessment study over at Clatsop Plains. We haven't done it yet, but there was $25,000 that was spent on the AOC water study. But we do anticipate working towards the Clatsop Plains water study. We've met with the state, Gail and I, and we're actually going to be requesting some money from the state to also help fund this. But we do have some of the ARPA dollars too, just in case, so we can have a robust project. And really what the project is really understanding what the water situation is over in Clatsop Plains so that we can manage anything that we might do now and in the future to protect those water resources. So the next one is Don, I think Mr. Webb. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wondered if we were ever going to see any results or anything from the AOC study.
We can get that to the board. So, yeah. And so the next one was countywide septage. As you know, we have the septage issues. We've heard from the septage haulers who are currently transporting the septage out to Rainier, Longview, and other places. We've had a number of conversations with the cities, because obviously the cities are the only entities that have wastewater treatment facilities. The county does not have a wastewater treatment facility, not in the traditional sense. And so, so we have been talking with one of our cities, and there's a possibility, but there's also been a lot of work on the anaerobic digester, and there's still interest, and I'll let Monica follow me up on this, but there's interest from Camp Rylea and others to still partner on that. So I think that one way or another, the $425,000 that's been set aside for this project will be spent, but we want to have it spent on the highest and the best use, and one that can really make inroads to this wastewater issue, whether it's coming from businesses or whether it's coming from septage haulers. So that's one of the areas that we don't know exactly what it means, but that money will probably likely be used over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'll just say that we're, like Dawn mentioned, we're continuing to have conversations because Camp Rylea is really looking at the opportunity to be more self-reliant and more resilient, and so they want to keep the conversations going. The city of Warrenton recently had a wastewater treatment study done, and they were presented with some different options. And so we'll be meeting with Camp Rylea and the city of Warrenton in the next couple of weeks to see what collaborative opportunities there might be there as well. So
the final one under that category was Westport Sewer, where we are making improvements to the Westport Sewer District, which are very vital for the functioning of that district. So, and Dean and the Public Works staff have been doing a great job helping us get that project done. So right now, if you look at all those categories, we have expended $2.7 million to date. And we do expect to spend the rest, obviously, but there is a question mark with the rural internet one. There's a little bit of a question mark on the septic one because we just are not certain what's going to happen. But I will go back. When we created this plan, we did so really flexibly because we started this back in 21, 22, and we didn't know what was going to happen in 22, 23, or 23, 24. So we've been very flexible on how we've been approaching this. I mean, to your board's credit, because things do change, and so there's a little flexibility still here, and we have $220,000 that has not been allocated in the above projects, and some of those projects might come in a little bit under, some might come a little bit over, but right now there's $220,000 that hasn't been allocated yet. So I'm just going to talk real quick about some of the requests that we've received. I've mentioned some of these in Friday updates at various times, but the first request came from the Napa School District. It was to have some help upgrading their water system, and the request was for $420,000. They've subsequently made requests through their congressionally directed funding opportunities and other funding opportunities. I don't know what the success of those requests are, but they are pursuing other options for that investment. The other is that we've been having conversations with the city of Warrenton. As you know, they have infrastructure needs on the water side particularly, and they have some land that is developable over on the Ridge Road area side, but they have water infrastructure deficiencies. And so they would like to invest in the infrastructure that can really address Fort Stevens, KOA, and the development that is going to be future along Ridge Road. And so I've had conversations with the city about whether the county would want to invest any of its ARPA dollars into some of that infrastructure, and then obviously anybody who develops would benefit from having some of that infrastructure in place. There's still a lot of other infrastructure that any developer is going to be developing because, I mean, there's going to have to be in-ground infrastructure. But we have talked with the city, and they're not certain exactly what an ask would be. They're working through it, but at some point we might hear from the city about that. So just wanted to let you know that. The other is that I shared a proposal about a potential economic development study for the STRs. Part of this money could come out. If the board decided to pursue that study, the money could come out of the ARPA dollars as part of the economic development piece. And so I'm just mentioning that as an option. And then the final one that I don't think it's going to be any kind of a big need, but the NetPens pier is still a project that the city and the county are closely collaborating on. And we believe that the insurance that the city has on the pier will pay for the majority of the cost, but the city and the county will have to cost share anything above that. And I think there will be some delta above that. I don't think it'll be huge, but it could be $50,000 or I'm going to say that, and then that's a huge asterisk because there's a lot of things that can happen when you're in the water. But we're trying to replace the NetPen pier in really a like to like, which means that the insurance company will pay more. And so when I say the insurance company, this is Astoria's insurance company. What we've been talking about with the NetPen pier is that the county will project manage because we have more staff capacity than the city has right now. But the city is going to be heavily involved because it is their insurance and they do own the pier. So that's kind of where we are right now. If the board, there is some flexibility as we understand some of these additional requests more. What I would say, staff will come back to your board, and we're open to any suggestions you have, any direction that you have, but we'll continually come back, and we'll put some more of the, indicators out there too, as we can to kind of tell the story a little bit more robustly about how these investments have made a difference. So.
Mr. Webb, you had something you wanted to say?
Well, I just wanted to put in a little word of encouragement around the NetPens issue. We have gill netters there. Mm-hmm. We have the county's whole fish. We put so much staff time into raising up those little puppies. And I love the fact that we're working with the city to talk about that property because it has a lot of potential. I have a group of people who want to have a dragon boat opportunity someplace, but I think that it might still be an area that could be used. So thank you for doing that. I think that's really a great thing for us to do for economic development and also for issues around cooperating with the city, especially since the port is so challenged with dealing with our fishing fleet and other
well, and I will say, Commissioner, that the city's been great to work with on this project, and I have to give kudos to our public works staff too, and our fisheries staff because they have come up with ways for us to still transport the fish from land into the net pens, even though there's no pier. And I think that the gill netters have been using some of the other piers to actually moor their boats. But it's something that is a priority for us to get going. There's a lot of permitting and a lot of other requirements for in-water construction, and so, but we are moving it forward. So it is important. There's a lot of economic resiliency that's out in those net pens. So
I agree with Commissioner Webb. I think that is, I'm glad to see that we're partnering with the city, and I know it is a priority for them and many of our fishermen around here, so I'm glad that we're working on that. I also think that the City of Warrenton project, I know they have limited resources to try to improve their infrastructure in the city, and that would be a big benefit to bring that water line to Ridge Road. They've been trying to do that via Hammond for many years and try to get more. And huge benefit to Fort Stevens KOA and any potential Fort Point development that would take place there, and then also to other developments that are along Ridge Road.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, at least from the county manager's seat, I think having some county investment out there makes a lot of sense, because that's where the development's going to happen, and we have to identify what those barriers are and then be creative on how we address them. And so having the county, which is not always typical, but having a county through these ARPA dollars help them deal with that infrastructure will pay huge dividends in freeing up a lot of private development along Ridge Road, which I think will be, you know, a definite contributor to our housing needs. So the city and I are still talking, and as soon as they have numbers and a plan, I'll come back to your board and share those with you. Because the numbers have varied a lot, anywhere from $100,000 up, and so we will work with them and find out what is palatable.
Ms. Banks?
I lean towards, with this spending, I lean towards supporting economic development, but also continuing to hold up situations like what is faced over there with the gill netters. Much as I would like this funding to go to Napa School District, I am well aware that they are seeking congressional dollars for it. And if in the future additional funding from this scenario that we have in front of us today loosens up or opens up, I would like to consider the school district and at least assisting them with their water concerns, because they don't have an adequate emergency water source there, and frankly, I don't have an adequate emergency water source at my house. So it would be beneficial for us to lend support to them, but I feel like in our current economic forecast, it would only behoove us to be supportive of future economic development, but also of our current needs with those pens and support the city of Astoria. Warrenton.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. Commissioner Thompson?
This is so helpful. You know, we've got all of these jurisdictions that are having concerns about funding and how to get it and what does it go for. Commissioner Toyoka is our delegate to the housing iteration of the county work group, but maybe there's, you know, how much can we do? But as we contemplate what needs to be done, if we look at all of the electeds considering the larger infrastructure issues and the relationships with each other, so that we have coordinated asks for the congressionally directed spending, the state funds and all of that, if we can get more unified, get to have a more coherent system. And now, if we're going to have dragon boats, do we have a Clatsop County Board of Commissioners dragon boat that we're going to be on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got one in my garage right now.
Sign me up.
How big a garage do you have?
I don't have a garage.
Oh. Commissioner Toyoka?
And, you know, the The reason it's easier to rally behind these type of initiatives and projects is that it's not just an immediate benefit. There is a long-term benefit for the entire community, and it helps that community. These are projects that are easy to get behind because it has such a allows them to become self or boost in this. Really easy to get behind that.
But there's no doubt that if Warrington can solve some of that infrastructure issue, that it will contribute greatly to freeing up some of the barriers that are currently existing. Because infrastructure is what's slowing things down.
Yeah,
So,
in all the cities.
yeah.
Commissioner Thompson?
And buildable land. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, so I want to talk about this economic study because in my mind, it's always good to have good data. And what I'm looking for is down the road, we've got a bunch of challenges to our current economic development. All right, we have a habitat conservation plan. We have a referendum about short-term rentals. What I'm looking for, and we have a housing crisis and a homeless crisis. I mean, heck, we have a whole list. What I'm looking for is validated data by a professional at what I think is a very reasonable cost that will save us money in lawsuits down the road. Now, that may be a futile hope, but I have this cheerful idea that if we have validated data, we can look at how to better manage short-term rentals, including the issues of caps, locations, housing affordability. I mean, all of these issues, plus an economist actually in our employ looking directly at our economy. So I hope that that's agreeable to my colleagues.
Well, yeah, I understand. I'm thinking about the timing with this because we do have the referendum in 2 months. It's going to be deciding this issue. Would we want to do that after we have the vote from the people about exactly what?
Well, here's the deal. Yeah, and that's a reasonable question. Pardon me for jumping on you, but I don't think it's going to go away no matter what happens on the election. Because what I see about land use issues, it's the long-term full employment of lawyers in Oregon. So what I'm looking at is to have a reasonable database solution that will allow us to negotiate compromises now and going forward, because it's like that we've got an issue coming before us tonight. My hunch is that issue will go to LUBA no matter what we decide. I think there are people who are eager to continue litigation, and if we have data that are valid, the need for those data isn't going to go away. I wish it were. If it were, I wouldn't even want to spend it at all. I'd just wait. Yeah. But I want to get ahead of it.
And I don't question the value of having good data. I just question it. Commissioner Banks and then Commissioner Toyo. Commissioner Banks.
I feel like the referendum slid our entire short-term rental conversation sideways. We were in a really good pattern of public engagement. We were in the middle of conversations regarding caps. We were in the middle of a lot of work. I know our staff was in the middle of a lot of work. And that referendum just kind of full stopped all that work, and it full stopped our conversations, because really having a conversation about short-term rentals now is out of our hands at this point until May or until after the resolution in May. And I'm not against your thought process of wanting data to support the conversation, either direction. It's just I'm agreeing with our chair a little bit in the timing, because I don't want to give money out when we're waiting for a vote in May. And it wouldn't behoove us, no matter what sort of information that we received. I mean, I understand the lawsuits are going to be coming at us from both directions. That's not something that I doubt whatsoever. It's just, I don't think that having data is going to change the fact that we're going to get sued. I I don't think, no matter what that data says, I don't think it's going to change the fact that we're going to get sued by both sides. I mean, that's just sad on the fact of us, because it's the county taxpayers' dollars that are going to be going down the drain because of it. But not something that is within our control at this point. And I don't think spending money on more data is going to help us at this.
More of a question for county council than anything. Here's the bus, I'm rolling it your way. No, with, the referendum on the ballot, from all the correspondence and things we get, it seems like either way it goes, there's going to be litigation from one side or the other, is going to be contested. How does that affect policy if it is litigated further? Does things still just, or how does that affect litigation hits? And it will either way. You feel like based on the.
Thank you, Commissioner. I agree with you. I think the indication is it will be litigated further after the first decision. Both sides have kind of indicated that, it's an important ruling for them, so they would pursue it as far as they could. As far as the status, the ordinance is kind of on hold until the referendum. We don't know what the court's going to say. But I do want to point out this is a referendum just based on that ordinance, and the board could still make other decisions. You could make a new ordinance. You could go a different direction. So I don't think the county would necessarily be, tied down waiting for the litigation on a strictly legal sense. Politically, it puts you guys in a pretty tough position. But legally, we could still move forward other ways. Make sense?
We could pass another ordinance. It could go,
and they could start the process all over again.
Caught in a loop forever, and then the people of the county are caught in a loop.
County manager respond then.
Yeah, I was, Chair Quaylen, members of the board. I just was going to kind of reiterate what county council just said, is that certainly with the referendum that your board would still have policy discretion afterwards, but it will take time for us to tee up that staff and board discussion and get direction about what that might look like. But I think litigation is going to be part of the STR continuum going forward. And, it's not unlike a lot of public policy issues that there's not agreement on, and the law is not as established as it is in some other areas. And so, I think that what's in front of the judges here is going to be a precedent for what may happen in other counties. So there's some questions that are being asked that are going to be precedent. So I think a lot of it's up in the air, but I think, there is going to eventually be legally, and how that occurs is through the courts. So.
County manager, Commissioner Thompson. You looked like you wanted to say something.
You know what? Thank you. So I'm the kind of person that if I know there's going to be a need to make another decision, because after the election, we're going to have to make another decision. What do we do, if anything? Do we just sit and wait, or do we do something? It's going to take time to do this study. It won't be ready probably before the election. That's not likely. But I'd rather get us beginning to have the logical, reasonable, data-validated policy development that could happen if we had the data. Because I'm the one with the mom that said sooner begun, sooner done. Because I would like to have a community solution that we could agree on, that the majority of folks could agree on, and that would pass muster at LUBA and DLCD and the courts and everywhere. Well, that's what I'd like. I don't know if I can get there. I think we are more likely to get there if we have valid data. And I like doing something proactively for what, again, I think is a reasonable cost. And here's the deal. When our staff came to us with information about caps, there wasn't a relevant study. The study we had said this is a survey of Airbnb asking city managers and city planners about their experience. Do not apply this to a county. It said it right in the study. Okay, good. So there really isn't anything. So maybe we could get on the map in a good way and set precedent in a good way for a thoughtful public policy process. I'd just like to get us on that dragon boat. Thank you.
No, and I appreciate your passion and your interest in that. It's my preference to wait. And I don't know whether the rest of the commission is. Commissioner Webb?
Yeah, as a former, land use planning consultant, who has worked with Johnson, actually in the past, I was rather astounded at the way this was solicited. I think it's rather extraordinary for a county commissioner to ask for a proposal, from one specific, entity. And, I think that first of all, I think this is an inappropriate use of ARPA funds. I don't think there's anything in the ARPA regulations using funds for this kind of an action. I think the process was what made me a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, don't we usually go out for bids and make announcements and things like that? We have a process. Johnson, of course, did our countywide housing study those many years ago. And there were a couple of us in this room who weren't all that thrilled, actually, the way that came down. So this is a very hurried action that I think that is hurried. We need to take a much more measured approach to any kind of contract like this.
Okay, Commissioner Thompson, what's that? We've just got a few minutes.
Quick like a bunny. So, valid concerns all. I asked Ariane Colombo to make a recommendation, and that was her recommendation. And so I just brought it forward because I wanted to get us moving. If we as a board want to have a different process, I'm okay with that. What I want us to do, if we want to have a whole bidding process and go through, I was looking to make it easy for staff to say yes and the board to say yes or no, and get us something that we could use. If we would rather do something more extensive, that's more labor intensive for a staff that's already operating over capacity. And I don't know how we move forward with that additional burden on our staff. I would like us to have validated data. I think it's a prerequisite for sound public policy. I don't know when or how, but by golly, I want us to move forward. So whatever is our collective pleasure in moving forward that also fits staff capacity, I trust the county manager's judgment about does it work for ARPA. So I would question that assumption that it does not. But please, could we get some data that relate to Clatsop County so that we can have a hope of negotiating with reasonable people toward solving this issue? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Thompson.
Well, if I might, Chair, members of the board, if your board would be interested, I think what staff can do is we can take a look at the scope of work, get a little work group together with Gale, County Council, and others, and just review that and review where we are with the information that we have and what information the board's going to need moving forward, to Commissioner Thompson's point, to kind of set the stage for what conversations may be forthcoming. But if we can take a look at that, and then we'll come back to your board with a recommendation about what that might look like and timing-wise. And we haven't done that yet. So we can do that if that is agreeable to the board as a path forward. So
that's good. Yeah, thank you, County Manager. Let's take 3 minutes. That clock is wrong.
Chair Queen, I unmuted.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't.
Oh, no worries. Get started here as soon as everybody gets back to the dais. All right. Go ahead and call this regular session to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And again, the Board of Commissioners, as the governing body of Clatsop County, all county service districts for which this body so acts, and as the Clatsop County Local Contract Review Board, is now meeting in regular session. Teresa, can we have the roll call?
Chair Cleveland.
Here.
Vice Chair Banks.
Here.
Commissioner Toyoka. Commissioner West. Here. Commissioner Thompson.
I'm here.
And we had an opportunity to review the agenda during our work session. Do we have any questions or comments? We have a motion?
I move to approve the amended agenda.
Second. Moved and second to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. First item is a proclamation, Child Abuse Prevention Month, and Nikesha Wombi, Executive Director of Classic CASA Program. Sorry about that, I butchered that.
Good evening, Chair Creela and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Patty Jo Angelini,
Yes.
and I'm Public Affairs Officer for Clatsop County. And Nikesha Womble, the Executive Director of Clatsop CASA, was unexpectedly called away. So I will be introducing the 2023 April Child Abuse Prevention Month proclamation for you. So spring is a time of new beginnings. It is also the time to renew our commitment to the protection of children in our community. Since 1983, a presidential proclamation has designated April as National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Observing Child Abuse Prevention Month allows us to raise awareness of the severity of this issue and to arm citizens with the tools to help prevent child abuse from happening. Awareness of a problem creates intentional change. Hundreds of children in Clatsop County are exposed to violence, drug abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. Chances are all of us know at least one child who has been a victim of child abuse and neglect. Imagine a 4-year-old whose parent abuses drugs and has left them alone repeatedly. They have no food or heat in the home. They are alone and afraid. This child becomes everyone's responsibility. Child abuse is everyone's problem. It is important for each of us to know the children in our communities. When we do, that means there's a safe place for children to find the grown-up support they need. If you suspect that a child is being abused or neglected, report it. Reporting suspected abuse creates awareness that a problem may exist. As lay citizens, it is not our role to determine whether abuse has occurred. We leave that to the professionals who are trained to assess whether the concern rises to the level of abuse. However, we have a responsibility to the children in our community to make the professionals aware of any potential concerns. Get involved with, advocate for, and support community programs that support children. Every child deserves a life free of abuse and neglect. Every child deserves a safe, permanent home. Now more than ever, we need to, as a community, renew our commitment to protect our children.
Thank you very much, Patty Jo. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve resolution and order proclaiming April 2023 as Child Abuse Prevention Month and authorize the chair to read and then sign the proclamation.
I second that motion.
Moved and seconded to approve the resolution order proclaiming April 2023 as Child Abuse Prevention Month and authorize the chair to read, then sign the proclamation. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. In the matter of proclaiming the period from April 1st, 2023 through April 30th, 2023 to be Child Abuse Prevention Month, Whereas child abuse and neglect are serious problems affecting every segment of our community, and finding solutions requires input and action from everyone. And whereas every child is precious and deserves to grow up in a healthy, safe, nurturing environment free from the dangers and harmful effects of child abuse and neglect. And whereas our children are the most valuable resources and will shape the future of Clatsop County, Oregon. And whereas child abuse can have long-term psychological, emotional, and physical effects that have lasting consequences for victims of abuse. And whereas child abuse prevention succeeds through partnerships among parents, child welfare agencies, mental and physical health care providers, schools, law enforcement agencies, faith-based organizations, businesses, and community members by fostering loving, supportive, and violence-free homes. And whereas we acknowledge that we must work together as a community to increase awareness about child abuse and contribute to promote the social and emotional well-being of children and families in a safe, stable, and nurturing environment. And whereas prevention remains the best defense for our children and families. Now, therefore, be it hereby resolved that the Clatsop County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim April 2023 as Child Abuse Prevention Month in Clatsop County, and calls upon all community members and local agencies to increase their engagement in efforts to effectively prevent, recognize, and respond to child abuse. Dated this 22nd day of March, 2023. Thank you very much, Patty Jo. Next is a proclamation proclaiming Problem Gambling Awareness Month proclamation. And our presenter is Emily Riley, a promotion specialist. Welcome, Emily.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Quayla and commissioners. I'd like to speak to you about problem gambling. Problem gambling is a public health concern potentially impacting more than 264,000 Oregonians of all ages and backgrounds in all communities. It has significant personal, social, and financial repercussions for individuals and their families. Clatsop County residents, along with their families, are able to successfully seek treatment through local and state resources. Through awareness campaigns, targeted prevention programs, and treatment services, the negative effects of gambling are significantly reduced. In Oregon, approximately 9.3% of all youth across grade levels who completed a survey in 2022 of the Oregon Student Health Survey, 9.3% endorsed having gambled over the past 30 days. And in Clatsop County, that number was 10.4% of all youth across all grade levels. Also in Oregon, 6th and 8th graders who reported gambling in the past 30 days were more than 2 times more likely to have attempted suicide at least once compared to those who do not gamble. This is not only across all grade levels, but across all ages, that problem gambling is associated with mental health, despair, and suicidal ideation and attempts. So I want to express how important it is that problem gambling awareness also increases our suicide prevention.
Thank you very much, Emily. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the resolution and order proclaiming the month of March to be Problem Gambling Awareness Month and authorize the chair to read and then sign the proclamation.
Second the motion.
Moved and seconded to approve the resolution and order proclaiming April 2023 as Child Abuse Prevention Month and authorize the chair to read and then sign the proclamation. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. In the matter of proclaiming March 2023 to be Problem Gaming Awareness Month. Whereas problem gaming is a public health concern impacting Oregonians of all ages and backgrounds in all communities. And whereas gambling impacts are recognized at the individual, family, and friends, community, and society levels, gambling problems drive up healthcare costs and contribute to societal problems such as homelessness, bankruptcy, loss of productivity in the workforce, and crime. And whereas Oregon and Clatsop County are dedicated to reducing the negative effects of gambling for all members of the community through balanced policy and an effective problem gambling services system, providing targeted prevention, education, and awareness programs, and treatment and recovery support services. And whereas thousands of Oregonians have successfully sought treatment, are in recovery, along with their families and concerned others, and have benefited from the expertise of professionals in the behavioral health treatment field who are dedicated to helping people recover from gambling problems. Now therefore be it hereby resolved that the Clatsop County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim March 2023 as Problem Gambling Awareness Month in Clatsop County, and invites all community members to join in the observance by raising awareness of the impacts of problem gambling. Dated this 22nd day of March 2023, Clatsop County Board of Commissioners. Thank you very much, Emily. Next item is business from the public. This is an opportunity for anyone to give a 2-minute presentation about any item on the agenda or any topic of county concern that is not on the agenda. Clerk of the board, are there any members of the public signed up to speak remotely?
No, there are not.
Okay. Next, we'll turn to anybody that signed up that's in person, and I know that Rick Bowers, I've got your card here, and you've signed up to speak. Please wait until you're going to give your name and address for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Thanks, Rick.
Rick Bowers, 357 Commercial Street. Spent the last 4 or 5 years reading consulting reports, academic studies, and books related to homelessness. I want to share a few things I've learned about rents and homelessness. The chart in the center of the handout that you've got shows median rent in each state and their corresponding rate of homelessness. As you can see, states with higher rents tend to have higher rates of homelessness. Clatsop County's rate of homelessness is 7 or 8 inches above the top of the page. The Econo Northwest report discussing the chart says high rents are to blame for the severity of the state's homelessness crisis. Economists John Quigley and Stephen Raphael were among the first to demonstrate that housing affordability, rather than personal circumstance, is the key to predicting the relative severity of homelessness across the United States. They estimated that a 10% increase in rent leads to a 13.6 increase in the rate of homelessness. Consistent with Quigley and Raphael's findings, our analysis indicates that median rents across the U.S. explains 43% of the variance in rates of homelessness. Elsewhere, this same report says, over the 2010 to 16 time period, Oregon created only 63 new housing units for every 100 households that formed during that time period. From what I can tell, we're not doing any better in subsequent years. 2 economists writing an economic policy review say, if policy advocates are interested in reducing housing costs, they would do well to start with zoning reform. The handout has other related quotations from other sources that I don't have time to share. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rick. I know this is a passion of yours, and thank you for providing this information. Teresa, do we have anybody else that's signed up?
No, we do not.
Okay. We'll go ahead and close the business from the public at this time and move on to the consent calendar. We've all had an opportunity to review the consent calendar. Any questions or comments on the consent calendar? Do we have a motion?
One question.
Yeah, Mr. Toyoka.
Here is your heart with the augmented the law enforcement. Sorry, put you on the spot, Sheriff. But we're already thin, so.
All right, I'm ready now. So the question was, how does that affect response for the rest of the rural areas of the county? The good news is the City of Gearhart doesn't have an overwhelming number of calls for service. And we're only down 1 position right now that we're looking to fill. And so we're actually in a pretty good spot right now. I do believe this is a great opportunity to support the City of Gearhart. They're part of the community, and they're one officer who has not had a real day off in a very long time. So I think I'm really honored that the City of Gearhart looked at us. volumes about the work that our deputy sheriffs do on a daily basis and our reputation. And I think this is just an act of goodwill for a short period of time while they find a new chief of police and an officer.
Joseph Gearhart, and you, just want to
No, I think we're going to be okay. We've looked at their call volumes and what we're doing. I think that we'll be able to, provide, it'll be county level of service. We're not going to be in Gearhart all the time. We'll respond to them just like the citizens we serve in the unincorporated areas of the county. But our response time is, averages less than 20 minutes for regular kind of, calls, not the priority calls. And frankly, that will be better than having to call out their one poor officer on his day off or just after he's completed a 10 or 12-hour shift and then having to come from home. And
Yeah, it really is a testament to the trust that they have in the Clatsop County Sheriff's Office.
Yeah.
And certainly, we appreciate your willingness to want to help out the city of Gearhart. Great testament to mutual aid, yeah. Yeah, Commissioner Webb?
And thank you too, Sheriff, for the way you presented the whole, giving us numbers and hourly rate, et cetera. I thought it was very thorough and very convincing.
Oh, thank you.
And congratulations for the community confidence in you.
Commissioner Thompson?
Well, and now that you're here, I'm really looking forward to having you come back and giving all of us an update on the state of public safety in Clatsop County. And I understand that's in the works. I think that'll be very good for us to have a real on-the-ground sense all over the county. I'd like to hear also what the fire departments are dealing with, because I've got great concern about first responders all over the county. So please come back soon.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Anybody else we want to bring up?
Executive of our Sheriff's Department.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second. Seconded to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor signify with an aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll start with Commissioner reports, and we'll start with Commissioner Thompson.
Well, thank you, sir. I think the reason I'm so cheerful tonight is that the Department of Land Conservation and Development had 3 workshops on sea level increase and coastal erosion. One in Seaside, Commissioner Webb came down for that, another one in Arch Cape at the Fire Hall, and a third one in Cannon Beach. It was a wonderful example of thoughtful, proactive outreach by DLCD. Hope they do more of that. A problem that every workshop body announced was south of Seaside, where the flooding has begun to recur over the highway. Right before I came here tonight, I went to the ODOT open house, and Bill Jablonski and Ken Schonkweiler, our beloved ODOT folks, are asking for, on their draft STIP, are looking for $250,000 or $300,000 to do a study, US 101 Circle Creek Seaside flood mitigation. So they're ahead of the game looking to do that. I brought for our public affairs specialist, because I know she loves this stuff, a copy of the STIP. And there's a website. They're having another ODOT open house in Tillamook tomorrow night. If you don't want to drive down to Tillamook, you can go online. And I trust our public affairs Empress. Well, I don't know. I think you should have a promotion. We'll put this out. This is the community's engagement. David Reed was there looking at, because if our highway system doesn't work, nothing else works. I mean, we can say that about a lot of things, but the flooding that is now recurring south of Seaside and the impact of sea level rise. So we've got another item on the agenda tonight about beachfront housing. And I, of course, am thinking, I just went to 3 workshops on rising sea level and coastal erosion, but the law hasn't caught up with the geologic reality. And so, to whatever extent we can go forward, Lisa Phipps said, well, Commissioner Thompson, how would you go forward? Planning Chair Chris Farrar was at the table with me, and we said, well, wouldn't it be swell if we had a joint work session with our Planning Commission to talk about issues like this? Chris's brilliant suggestion was, and let's look at the public infrastructure first to see what we can do there so that we're modeling the appropriate behavior for neighbors, which I think is just an excellent idea. So that's my happy good news. I'll tell you, I keep working at AOC. I'm working wherever possible to develop those positive relationships so that people, I want to say, know us and love us and care about us all over the state. So I think that's happening.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Banks.
March has been eventful but uneventful, which has kind of been nice. Budget season is gearing up, as we all know, so working through that with Northwest Senior Disability Services. There is no meeting on the agenda for CFPLC for a short bit. Getting ready, Fair Board's getting ready for an amazing fair, and so I'm just excited for their starting work sessions. So they are mimicking our productiveness, I would say, in their own board, and that's exciting to see. I really have enjoyed conversations with their new fairgrounds manager. He seems to be acclimating well. It's a bit of a difference in working for the city of Warrenton. Now he's working for the county, but also then for the Fair Board themselves. So that's a bit of a change, but he seems to be doing well. Overall, things are uneventful. I will have to say I was kind of excited to have legislation passed for pumping our own gas. And I have to say, being a rural person for the majority of my life, that is very exciting. And I never understood when I first moved here to Oregon why we couldn't. It never made any sense. But and I get it, taxes and all the fun things, but it's kind of nice. Now I don't have to wait for a poor soul to come out in the chilly early morning to pump my gas in Napa. I can jump out and do it myself.
Thanks, Commissioner Banks. Commissioner Webb.
Yeah, I too have attended 2 of the meetings for the Sea Level Rise LCDC program, and I have spoken with the county commissioner about the fact that I wish that this, with the county manager. I'm sorry, Mr. Boone. Please forgive me for that. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I think that the work that DLCD is doing is really, really notable. They have maps that are absolutely astounding. And I would love to be able to involve more members of our county staff and the cities in this work that's going on. I have been terribly saddened at the lack of public response to the 2 meetings I went to. I don't think they did a good job of getting people out at all. They obviously didn't have our PIO working on attendance. But it's a wonderful project that's going on, and I think I also would like us to talk to Justin Gibbs about it, because I think it's a wonderful launching pad for a county-wide public information and training for our citizens about what to do both in these, subduction zone catastrophes that are likely to happen at any minute, but also in the longer term issues that we're going to be facing on our landscape. I think that our chair is going to have a heart attack when he looks at the pink areas that are almost, actually, it's amazing to me, almost your whole district is going to be subject to high water. It's a marvelous presentation that I really would love to see many, many more people be exposed to. We still have one more tomorrow night. It's going to be in Brownsmead, which also is going to be, of course, a hugely impacted area. I was kind of sad that they didn't have one actually in Astoria. The map isn't too grim for Astoria, but it's everybody's interest. You know, I mean, I think it's something that concerns all citizens. And I think recently, I think I reported on the Pat Corcoran presentation on tsunamis, that I think we need more of a comprehensive approach for hazardous readiness in our county. And there certainly are no geographic or political boundaries for any of that preparation. So I've spoken with the county manager, and I hope that maybe we can get something rolling for those issues. Otherwise, I spent way too much of the weekend reading the preparation for tonight's meeting and slogging through the Arch Cape speech. When I was head of a county planning department myself, I used to say to any of my staff who brought me an action that I always said, did you get your boots dirty? Because if you haven't been on site, don't come to me with any kind of a report. But so today I got my boots, or a couple days ago, I got my boots really, really dirty. And I just want to congratulate the staff for this report because it's really pretty. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Webb. Commissioner Toyoka?
Good evening, everyone. Keep it quick. Just want to remind everyone the Cedar Awards are coming up on April 6th. Other than it's a really nice event, it's really well produced and done. It's a great example of hard work, perseverance, and dedication. Read through some of the scenarios of the businesses that are receiving awards. Really entrepreneurship, just work and dedication are alive. It's a wonderful way just to spotlight some of our community members and see what they're doing. The other thing is NACO veterans had another meeting, and a lot of but the one I wanted to highlight is veteran. Try to proliferate throughout, for all available to all veterans. And a lot of it is, like the old days when I came home, it was, just rub dirt in it and get back to the work. There was no World War II. Grandfather came home and they called it battle fatigue or shell shock. Mm-hmm. We have PTSD, and there's a mid-range of folks that, we can't, even have a name for it. Clinical or the job. There was no transitional phase. So the NACO veterans program where they're having other veterans, you can know what you've been through, know what people, so you can have a relational basis. To talk, it's more comforting to talk to somebody who's actually in your boots than it is to have somebody go, well, I can empathize. They're getting that relational standpoint. Program. Thompson, county manager, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you as a Marine, you just, you've been places, done things that normal humans don't do. And I know things. Oh, yeah. Nice to have that network available. As I learn more and as I get more, we don't have a veteran services officer for now. As I learn more, I'll pass it on to the staff and see how we can get plugged into this network.
Yeah, thank you. Great program. Thank you, Mr. Toyoka. County Manager.
Chair Gribble, members of the board, just to piggyback off of Commissioner Toyoka, staff will be reaching out to help coordinate anybody that would like to attend the Cedar Awards event. And so there is a registration process, so we will reach out and if your board would like us to then coordinate that. The other is, I will say, Commissioner Torioka just mentioned Veteran Service Officer. We just hired a Veteran Service Officer, meaning CCA did, and so they're on staff and processing applications, and so we are moving forward again. So, and that's all I have, Chair Cuervo.
Thank you very much, County Manager. We'll move on to the business agenda this evening. First item is appeal of hearings officer decision, JJG ORE LLC, variance on page 37. Ian Sisson, our senior planner, is here.
Thank you, Chair Quila and Commissioners. I'm Ian Sisson, Senior Planner with the Community Development Department. I have a short presentation for you just to introduce the application and the appeal process. And the action I'm requesting from you tonight is to issue an order stating the scope of review for this appeal. So you can see, go back here, you can see a photo of the subject property here. There's an existing house that was built in 1930, and the applicant, property owner, wishes to tear this house down and build a new home that is built to withstand the flood and geologic hazards that are present on the property. You can also see in this photo that there is a 6-foot wide public beach access, which was a big part of the reason the applicant was seeking this variance. So the address is on Carnahan Road, and the zone designation is Arch Cape Rural Community Residential. Again, it's in the flood hazard and geologic hazards overlays. The lot width is substandard for the ACRCR zone, which has a 60-foot minimum lot size for new parcels. Carnahan Road, most of the oceanfront parcels, you may have seen in the staff report, I did some analysis, and the average was around 50 feet wide. So the average is substandard as well, but this particular parcel is more substandard than most of the others on the street. And our code allows for a reduced side yard setback down to 5 feet for substandard size lots that were legally created prior to our zoning regulations. However, the lot size of this parcel is greater than the maximum, and so even though it's substandard in width, it didn't qualify for the reduced setback. So the 10-foot setback applied, and the applicant requested a variance to one of the side yard setbacks. And there's a diagram here prepared by the applicant showing the area of the variance request, and again, that 6-foot public pathway on that side of the property. So the existing dwelling is just shy of 1,700 square feet, has 4 bedrooms. It's about 20 feet tall with 2 stories. The proposed dwelling would be on a single story. The first floor would be elevated above the base flood elevation, which is required because of the flood hazards there, and would be roughly the same size, slightly larger, same number of bedrooms, and again, designed specifically to withstand those hazards that are present. And again, because of the proposed building width here, the applicant was requesting a 6-foot variance for the 10-foot side yard setback for a 4-foot setback to the north property line. There again is a site photo. And so variance applications are processed under a Type 2A procedure, which requires a hearing with a public hearing with a hearings officer. That hearing was held on November 22nd of last year. And during the hearing, the staff report recommended approval based on the facts that were presented and the applicable criteria. Following the hearing, the record was reopened at the request of the applicant to respond to some of the public testimony that the applicant did not have a chance to respond to during the hearing. So during the extended record period, opponents of the variance submitted building plans, schematic design for a 3-bedroom home that was narrow enough to meet the 10-foot side yard setback on both sides. And they argued that the applicant therefore would be able to make a reasonable use of the property without a variance. The hearings officer issued his decision on February 9th of this year and denied the variance request. Essentially, the main reason for the denial was that the hearings officer found that the applicant did not meet their burden in justifying that the requested variance was the minimum adjustment necessary to have reasonable use of the land. And so the conclusion was that the variance could not be approved. And on February 20th, the applicant submitted a notice of appeal, which included the basis for the appeal, which is Exhibit F in your packet. The applicant's main arguments were that the variance was the minimum necessary for the reasonable use of the land, and they went on to expanded on why they believe that the variance is necessary in order for the applicant to use the property as was intended by the zoning ordinance, that the hearings officer's decision did not appropriately address the findings in the staff report, and they also called out a procedural error in an attempt that they had made to issue some final legal arguments after the hearing had already concluded, which the hearings officer rejected. And that was why the hearing ended up being reopened rather than just having the applicant be able to submit a final argument without opponent's ability to respond. It was a little bit unique as far as procedures that I've seen before, and so the applicant had raised an issue with that particular item. So again, our code requires that we, before you really do anything with this appeal, decide how you're going to process it. So the first option would be to deny review, which is essentially adopting the hearings officer's decision as your own. And second option would be to review on the existing record, so not taking any new evidence into consideration, just reviewing what's already in the record. Or three, to limit the review to any issues you determine are necessary to properly resolve the matter, and in that case, you could take new evidence and testimony on those limited set of issues. Or you could have a de novo hearing as if the hearings officer November 22nd hearing had never happened. And if your board were to decide to hear the appeal, then we would schedule that for a later date based on the deadline we have to issue a final decision. I think we would be shooting for your second meeting. And any appeal of your decision would go before the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Do we have any questions? 4 choices in front of us. How we want to proceed? Sounds like it was a very unique situation where the record was reopened just for the applicant to provide testimony that they allowed for the opponent to provide as well.
So the applicant read, there is a statute which I cannot recall off the top of my head, but there is a provision in the Oregon Revised Statutes for the applicant to submit a final written argument after the hearing has concluded.
Right.
And basically that would kind of allow them to bolster their arguments that were presented during the hearing, not necessarily to introduce new evidence. I don't think new evidence would be admitted, but they can kind of reassert points that were already made. And so the hearings officer read the statute differently and said, you know, you only have that option in the context of a hearing that has been continued. And he said, you know, at the conclusion of this hearing, I clearly closed the hearing and closed the record to any party, to all parties. And so therefore he rejected the applicant's final legal argument. But he said, I would entertain a request to reopen the record and do an extended record period where there was a 7-day period which ended up being a 14-day period for any party to submit anything they wanted, a second 7-day period for any party to rebut any information that was presented during the first period, and then a final period for the applicant to provide final legal arguments. That was the procedure that was carried out, and it did take a while because we had to issue a notice. So I presented that option to the applicant. They decided to pursue it. And because they did decide to pursue it, we had to give all parties the opportunity to say whether they believed the record should be reopened or not. And the parties agreed that it could be. And so the hearings officer decided to grant the request and reopen the record and did that open record period. So it was kind of like a follow-up mini hearing, but it was all in writing.
Did it twice, yeah. Huh. Interesting. Commissioner Thompson?
I love my neighborhood. I mean, it's a lot of really smart people who want to think about things and have different, sometimes contradictory opinions about.
If you could mute yourself, please, if you're joining us virtually.
About what is the right thing to do. There's clearly a conflict here. When I was looking, Ian, could you put it back on the map so that we can see the plots? So colleagues, there's a beachfront row of houses, and then there's a second row of houses behind it, and then ODOT right away, and then the highway. So it's jammed in. It's jammed in. And that walkway, all right. So I don't know if this is the right place or the right question, but when I'm looking at this decision, he says, the hearings officer, if there are reasonable uses of the land that do not require a variance or that require a smaller variance, the requested variance is not warranted no matter how reasonable the resulting development may be. My jaw's open. Is that the standard we've always applied, and I just wasn't quite tuned into that?
This is actually the first variance that I've personally worked on. I would have to defer to probably Julia or Gail to tell you what the has been, but they both reviewed the staff report that I prepared and the findings that I prepared, and we're kind of on the same page about how we were interpreting the variance criteria. Obviously the hearings officer came to a different conclusion and was looking a little bit more strictly at, what is reasonable use of the land.
Well, okay, so I sat on the Planning Commission for almost 5 years, and we heard variances. We did, as planning commissioners, hear variances. I don't think I have ever, and maybe it's just because I've been here for 8 years and my mind has adjusted to this different reality, but I don't think I've ever heard that. And remember, I just came from 3 workshops on rising sea level, which you can see is right out the front door, and beachfront erosion. And third thing, the house is built in 1930. Well, if we are in a harsh maritime environment right on the ocean with the salt water and the wind, I'm thinking to myself, that's a 93-year-old house. And yet, okay, so that's on one side. On the other side, I'm thinking, I always want to do the legally proper thing. And we're going to end up at LUBA anyway. So what's the cheapest, most efficient way? Because time is money. To continue this conflict is to only exacerbate it. And so what I'm looking for from staff is, what's the quickest way to get this resolved?
Well, so you have, again, 4 options. 3 of those options would involve this item coming back to you in some form of a hearing, whether that's on the record, limited set of issues, or de novo. The other option is to deny review, and you could do that tonight. And so I guess that would be the shortest.
Denying review, in spite of my scratching my head going, wow, that sure isn't the decision I would have made as a planning commissioner. The shortest, cheapest way to resolution would seem to be to say, let it stand, and then somebody else will take it to LUBA. And then legally qualified people can make this decision, and we don't have to put our egos, we don't have to insert our egos into this situation about what we think is the right thing to do and second guess the hearings officer.
I don't know, it's a tough one because I don't necessarily agree with the hearings officer. I think the staff made the right decision in this regard. So, Commissioner Banks?
Was there no other reason given for denial of the variance? There's no waterway being impacted. There's no environmental potential impact that I can see in regards to what would have caused the denial of the variance other than just to deny it. Which everything inside myself, I'm like, I am all for property rights. You own this property. You should be allowed to build upon the property in the manner of which you can build within the space allotted. And I understand variances for the purpose that are used, but it seems like a very logical request, especially in consideration to the beachfront property and to like we built on the footprint of our home because it was Gertie's home and the bathroom was built on the porch. So I would like to be able to honor these property owners with something much more safe. So is there any other reason for that denial other than just?
Well, again, the reason for denial, really the primary reason for denial was that the hearings officer found the applicant didn't meet their burden, so that that the variance that was requested was the minimum necessary to have a reasonable use of the land. In other words, they could build a smaller house on that property and meet all the setbacks because their proposal meets the front yard setback, it meets the south side yard setback, it meets the ocean front setback. The only setback that they're proposing vary from is to the north property line. And so, and again, the opponents in this extended record period demonstrated that, you know, at least in their estimation, with the tools that they had, that a house could be designed to fit on that property, meeting all of the setbacks. And, you know, it would be smaller than what the applicant was proposing by about 300 square feet, and it would have one fewer bedroom. It would have 3 bedrooms, I think, is what they showed. But what the applicant was proposing was, you know, essentially to replace the square footage and the number of bedrooms that exist in the existing home. And the the opponents during the hearing raised the issue also that the bedrooms that are in the existing home may not, and I can't say for sure, but may not meet current codes for the size of height of ceilings and things like that. So, you know, in their minds, it would be unreasonable to expect that you can get the same number of bedrooms today within a small footprint. So again, the variance criteria are very clear that the conditions on the property must be so unique and unusual and apply only to that property, such that without a variance or through the strict application of the code, the applicant would be deprived of reasonable use of the property. And so that there was just in the staff report, there was an attempt that was made to define what is a reasonable use based on the existing development in the neighborhood. The hearings officer didn't take so much of that into account, but came to the conclusion that the applicant didn't meet their burden to say there was no reasonable use of the property without the variance, or that it was the minimum necessary to have reasonable use.
Yeah, Commissioner Webb?
Yeah, I actually watched the recording of the public hearing, and read all of the, neighboring comments, and I was really astounded by the vitriol from the neighbors. And then when I went there, these houses are really already very close together. I mean, I stood there for a long time and I printed out some of your pictures from there, saying to myself, what is the impact of this? And you did a great job, incidentally, on those photographs by actually superimposing a shot of the new construction. And it was very clear to me that the neighbors had done a lot of homework. Their comments didn't look to me like Jane and Joe Smith's comments. They certainly knew a whole lot about zoning codes and other things. And so, do you all have any feel for why the neighbors were so opposed to this? It's such a slight variance. And I just couldn't, they were talking as if, they were talking, of course, about their view corridors, which always makes me crazy in Oregon. But, and you all put those in the conditions. You wrote into the conditions that they weren't going to be able to cheat by putting vegetation too high, that would restrict the view corridors for the people on the east side of the road. So do you have any feel for what was going on with the neighbor? Is this an area that has been contentious before about replacing houses, or maybe
I think
I should be asking Commissioner Thompson?
That may be true. I think the view issue was really the primary concern of the opponents. And so there were at least two property owners on the east side of the street who believed their views would be impacted because of the width of the house and also just the shape of the roof. And so that was really the primary reason that they put forward.
And I got a kick out of that because actually the proposed new house is a couple of feet shorter than the existing house was. So and because of the beach access, which is paved there, very impressive, gave a wider view corridor than they would have gotten. So I don't know. But part of my concern is that I think that some of sitting back and saying, well, this is clearly going to go to LUBA. I wonder how vulnerable our hearings officer is in terms of process. That is something, because he's our hearings officer, that the responsibility is on us. So I wonder about that. This was a pretty, I've been at this a lot longer than you have, Ian, but I shared too that this process of not continuing the hearing, that's pretty unusual. Because, these things are they're a little bit like a courtroom process. I hope I'm not being too sidewinded here, but the deal is that the pro does their presentation, the con does their presentation, and then there are rebuttals. And there was leaving the hearing open gave no opportunity for that rebuttal, and that's sort of standard operating procedure for these types of hearings. So I think he's kind of vulnerable.
If I could, I think the hearing was conducted correctly. in that, you know, all parties were given the opportunity to present their arguments. You know, the applicant started with its presentation, and then the hearings officer invited parties in favor, parties who were neutral, and parties who were opposed, and then gave the applicant the opportunity to provide a rebuttal at the end of the hearing. What the hearings officer said was nobody requested a continuance during the hearing, and so at the end of the hearings officer closed the hearing and closed the record because no continuance had been requested. In order for the hearing to be continued, either the hearings officer or a participant would need to say,
Yeah, in my experience,
to request a
when
continuance.
there's contentiousness like this from the neighbors, they almost always leave the hearing open, just so people can have time to research, you know, some of the allegations that have been made. So I don't, you know, I hate it when things go to LUBA and it's a procedural issue that decides a case. But of course, we're all used to that. It happens all the time. But I just.
Mr. Tucker, you want to say something?
You know, in all my encounters with you know, very technically very smart. So my main thing is, you know, reasonable use of the land.
Yeah, I think the hearings officer didn't try to make it objective. So in the staff report, I definitely tried to make that standard objective by pulling data from the neighborhood and saying, you know, here's the average and the median lot size and lot width and dwelling size and things like that. The hearings officer's decision didn't contain that kind of analysis.
The standard is neighbors are doing it this way, so it should be. You're very technically prepared.
Neighbors aren't doing it the same way. I mean, that's what struck me. That's what struck me was that it's not as if it's a neighborhood where there is and I've seen some of these where, you know, especially in newer developments, where houses are all cookie cutters and everything is so standard. And if somebody wants to vary that, well, that can be a little challenging. But in this case, I mean, this neighborhood, drive down Carnahan, these houses are real close together. They're quite different. It's just to me, there's no sensory issues here. And I thought the conditions that you always come forward with for variances that the staff came up with were, I think they addressed a lot of those issues.
I agree.
So,
Commissioner Banks?
I just reading over this, I tend to be on the side of staff recommendation. So I guess my question is I wish to support property owner and in their efforts to achieve what they wish to achieve with the property they own. And so what is staff's recommendation for us to help assist them to get from point A to point B in the quickest fashion? Of these four options that you provide, because for me, I instinctually don't want to deny them because I feel like everybody should have their opportunity to express themselves when they request it and to be able to go through the process. So instinctually, I don't want to deny them. But if denying the appeal expedites the process for them to get to the endpoint that they wish to get to, which is to build on their property. I'm looking for advice from you on how do we help this property owner achieve their end goal.
Okay, I don't know, can you answer that, Ian?
Can you answer
I was just gonna say that, I mean, we had those four choices, and certainly one of those was that we could do on the record, I mean, just by the record review, right?
Right.
Would probably be the most simple way for us to go forward, right?
Yeah, if you decide to take it up, that would be probably the simplest. I will say, you know, I appreciate the kudos on the staff report. I personally don't have very strong feelings one way or the other. You know, I'm a neutral party here, and the hearings officer is an very experienced land use attorney and understands the law much deeper than I do. So, you know, he issued the decision that he did. I respect that. You know, it can be challenged. Obviously, here we are with an appeal, and the applicant has an attorney, and the opponents also have attorneys. And so, you know, if you were to take this issue up, I think we're really going to be diving into the technicalities of the criteria and the law and the precedents that are out there. And so that's the kind of hearing, whether it's on the record or de novo or limited issues. I think, you know, that's the level of detail and scrutiny that's going to be necessary to come to a different conclusion than the hearings officer who has, you know, an extensive legal background on land use issues. And so, you know, the other option again would be to deny review, to uphold the hearings officer's decision. You know, in any case, any party has the opportunity to appeal this to LUBA. So if you took up the hearing and you held the hearing, and say you overturned the hearings officer's decision and you approved the variance, it's possible the opponents could then take it to LUBA. Or if you hold a hearing and you decide the hearings officer was correct, cannot approve the variance request, it remains denied, then the applicant could also appeal your decision to LUBA. So it's possible that it could end up there either way. I can't predict that.
For me personally, I don't want to set a precedent of denying a property owner their basic property rights. And if us as a county commission set a denial of that, does it further impede their ability to move forward in LUBA? Would that hinge the conversation to LUBA's level? And so as a commission, or as just myself, I'm going to speak as individual commissioner here, I don't want to set a standard of denial of somebody's inherent property rights.
I want to make a.
So Commissioner Thompson and Commissioner Webb. Commissioner Thompson.
So Commissioner Banks, I appreciate that. That's why I started out with this, because I've been hearing about my neighbors who don't like development. Well, they like development fine when their house was built, but after that, maybe not so much. Well, it's human nature, right? I love it. I don't want it to change. And if I'm smart or rich and I know law or I can hire lawyers, then I have a feeling that I can and should control the change in my neighborhood. So what I heard was the more complicated it is, the longer it takes, the more money it costs. So for me, I don't think that we will taint our support of anybody's property rights if we with friends who make it take longer and cost more money, that's not really an act of friendship, you know what I mean, or support. But it's a shame. It's a shame that it can't be worked out, that neighbors can welcome new neighbors, especially ones who are putting in an energy-efficient house that's going to be better for the environment. They're going to be putting in a house that's raised so that it will deal with the changing in sea level and all of that. It's a shame that those changes can't be welcomed and worked with. But longer is more expensive. The more legal hours, the more consultant hours are spent, the more expensive it is for everybody.
Community Development Director Gail Henderson. Gail.
Hi, thank you. I just want to thank everyone for their discussion and especially Ian for the great presentation he did today. I just want to address your concerns, Commissioner Banks. First of all, this is part of the process, the appeal process. So if your board were to choose to deny the review, that is not going to impact LUBA's view of it. They're not going to look at it as damaged goods and saying if the board of Class of County Commissioners wouldn't even touch this, it's obviously flawed. So I wouldn't let that influence your view of how you want to look at your four choices before you this evening. The other thing is that when we look at development, and you mentioned this earlier, that you support someone's right to develop within their parameters that they have in the zoning code. And so in this case, the applicant has asked for something above and beyond what we would normally allow. So they are asking something special from us. And so even if you as a board decided not to review the case, or as Ian pointed out, if you did a hearings officer review and it goes to LUBA, and it still could be denied at LUBA, and it could get appealed to circuit court, and it could still be denied there, and it could go all the way to the Supreme Court and still be denied. But regardless of whatever outcome happens, the property owner still has the ability today to come in and build on their property. So no one has said you cannot build. It just, they may not be able to build their exact dream house that they would like to build. And the variance process is not set up to help people build their dream structure. It's set up to help people who, without any relief from the rules, wouldn't be able to do basically anything with their property. And so that's really the whole purpose of a variance. So I just wanted to kind of give you some level of confidence that regardless of whatever decision your board decides tonight and how to handle this, that this property owner still has the ability to construct a home on their property right now. So.
Thank you, Gail. Commissioner Webb, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think, well, it's just that technically LUBA is not supposed to consider it. They are supposed to make their decision on the merits of the case. And so our opinion really won't have any on LUBA's decision. Well, and I should say, it won't have any impact if we simply deny review.
Hello, this is Christian. I'm the attorney for the applicant. I don't know if I'm allowed to speak, but I do have a comment about the impact on review.
No, I'm sorry, Christian, no.
Okay,
Christian,
understood.
Sorry, Christian, you're not allowed to speak right now. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
So, can we go back to the four choices?
And just to clarify, denying review would imply that you're affirming the hearings officer's decision, essentially adopting those findings as your own, and so that's what, those findings are what LUBA would review if it got to that point. And, you know, they could, if they found that some of those findings were not sufficient, they could remand.
Okay. Commissioner Banks?
So of the four options, which option here allows us to review all of the materials, including the materials after the reopening, closing of the case?
If you wanted to review everything, it would be option number 2 would allow you to review everything that's already in the record without accepting any new evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Option number 4 would be a completely new hearing.
Well, I think we've had this discussion now and talked about the most efficient way to go forward, and I think Commissioner Thompson's first suggestion was probably the right one. And which was the denying the review. And I know that we have all kind of expressed our prejudice with doing that, but probably is the most prudent way to go forward.
Can't, vote in favor of denying. I just, I can't, but I'm one of four.
So, need a motion.
So question though,
Commissioner Toroka?
so, narrower, it could be taller. Really more, than, my only hang up, I guess, in this whole thing is a subjective.
Well,
If I
I
could
think, go ahead, Nick.
If I could just correct one thing. I believe, that the proposal would just about meet the maximum height of 18 feet.
There's a few feet.
Yeah, 18 feet is the max height for an oceanfront lot.
3 inches or something.
Is proper use is.
And again, I think as Gail and Ian and most mentioned, that they still have the opportunity to build a house, not getting granted the variance, building that house. So they're still allowed to build a.
Came in here tonight knowing how I was gonna vote. And now I have no idea how to vote. But I do have kind of an idea. And that is that, we went with option 2, which would basically be to rehear the hearing.
Yeah, you'd be reviewing the evidence that was officer.
And so if we did that, and then we could express an opinion, and that would be our way of responding to our constituents, how we would feel about this. I think we're all pretty sure, however, that at the end of that, this is going to Luba. Yes.
Winners at Luba.
Oh, exactly. Big time money. Well, so these are District 5 constituents, right? So my constituents. So here's the deal. I'll make a motion to deny review, not because I agree with the review, but because I wish to expedite the process. So I move that we deny review.
I'll second. So it's moved and seconded to determine the Board of Commissioners' scope of review for the appeal, to deny the review in the matter of the variance application number 22-000318. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. Oh, yep, question. Commissioner Toroka.
That's a question.
Okay.
So if we vote in this, are we setting any? The biggest hang up in being a precedent for any future
This is still a quasi-judicial land use issue, and those do not set any kind of legal precedent. County council on that.
The county, yeah. You have a point of clarification?
Point of discussion. So my curiosity is if we went would LUBA take into account or
so
after we reviewed the record, would that then enter the LUBA process?
your decision would become part of the record, and so you have before you tonight the hearings officer's notice of decision. There would be a similar notice of decision of your board with your findings in this case.
Any other points of discussion? We have a motion on the table here.
Or do a roll call vote.
Okay. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay. Roll call vote?
Chair Kula?
Aye. Well, I mean, just to verify everyone.
Oh, did you want to roll call?
I did. Just to-
Okay.
but that's what I asked for, so. Aye.
Vice Chair Banks?
Aye.
Commissioner Torioka?
Nay.
Commissioner Webb, excuse me.
Nay.
Commissioner Thompson?
Aye.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I move restricting review to the record made by the hearing.
Okay.
When it's-
Good.
That it's the,
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Go ahead.
that it's the entirety of the record, including the reopening and all information.
Right, that's,
I
Yeah,
just want a point of clarification.
everything from the application to the hearings officer's decision would be part of the record you would,
Okay.
you would review.
Thank you.
Question?
Yes.
So, let's talk about cost, because this is time and money. How much time will it take? Do you know how many legal hours are usually involved with this kind of thing? I mean, I know you may not even know that, but here's the deal. I'm going to vote against this because I want this to be as brief as it can be. I want it to be as inexpensive as it can be because it's already cost time, money, and ill will. And I want to contain that with respect. Thank you.
My work as staff to prepare the materials for the hearing for you would be pretty minimal because the record's already there. I have all the materials, and so my work would be pretty simple. So it would kind of depend on the parties involved and what level they wanted to continue to be involved in a review on the record. Again, they wouldn't be able to provide new evidence, but they could still have the opportunity, or they would still have the opportunity to testify during that hearing. So those individuals or their representatives would be able to come here and to present to you, restate the arguments that they made without presenting any new evidence.
And when would we be thinking that would be possible?
Probably the second meeting in April, so that we can stay on track with our legal timeline to issue a decision.
Okay. Well, any other comments?
Well, a question.
Commissioner
we wouldn't do it during a commission meeting, would we? These things are almost always separate from a regular meeting, aren't they? Or would we have to, Gail has plus one.
So the normal procedure would be for you to rehear on the record during a regular commission meeting. I guess alternatively, you could work with the county manager and your fellow board members to schedule a special meeting to conduct the hearing. But, given your meeting load and your work session load and your work schedules and your personal lives, it could be difficult to arrange that and still maintain our legal deadlines that Ian has talked about. So most likely it would be held at a regular meeting.
I mean, that is my concern too. I mean, we're wading into an issue that's already gone to the hearings level, hearings officer level.
2.5 hours long.
Yeah, and
The hearing.
I
told you so, but I'm telling you so.
we're dealing with narrow issues, that's for sure. Commissioner Tuoka?
Friend of council, just in terms of the nature of the decision is, you know, is that anything? We're just causing delay and let.
I didn't quite understand the question.
You know, I think there's a decision on definition made. I don't know, is that countywide that, you know?
No, I don't think so. It is a, judicial process, and so the decision is your guys' decision, and I think it can be appealed, but there's no, liability. They couldn't sue us for decision. They could just appeal it to LUBA.
Commissioner Banks?
I guess my, made possible, we review the record, come to our own conclusion as a commission, and that hearings officer, that at least goes to. So I guess that's where I'm stuck on, is that at least our voice
Yeah, Commissioner Thompson.
Didn't we just hear Commissioner Webb say that they don't, sorry, she didn't say it quite like this. They don't care what we say.
Oh, they don't.
It's part of the record. It's part of the record. But technically, they have to consider it on the merits of the law. They're making the same.
for our concerns are.
They'll know, yeah. But then the party pays for the privilege of having our opinions on record. I mean, that's the part, it's no favor to them.
The request, they're fully requesting to pay. I feel like they're going in of the cost of the appeal, correct?
That's correct, and we did change that fee so that they only will pay if your board agrees to take up the case.
Okay, so any other comments, questions on this?
So I thought I understood. They only pay if we agree to take up the case, but if we take up the case, they have to pay us.
But they're going in with their eyes.
They have to pay their lawyer too. And yeah, they have to pay the lawyer and anybody else. I mean, it compounds the expense, is my concern.
The review, we have had a motion and a second, correct?
Yeah.
All right, determine the board commissioner's scope of review for the appeal, the hearing officer's decision. And we've, opted for restricting the review to the record made by the hearing body in the variance application for number 22-000318. Okay, all those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay. Okay,
Roll call.
roll call.
Chair Kula,
Nay.
Vice Chair Banks,
Aye.
Commissioner Toyoka? Commissioner Webb?
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson?
Nay.
Okay, the ayes have it. So we will restrict the review to the record made by the hearing body. And thank you so much, Ian and Gail, for your patience and time this evening.
And your hard work.
And your very hard work on this matter.
Thank you.
Ian, you can stay there if you want to. That's fine.
You got another one coming up.
That's right.
You're much taller in person.
Yeah, that's all about.
Okay, next is a public hearing, rural accessory dwelling unit regulations amendments on page 46. All right, and staff report. Yeah, this is the continuation public hearing on ordinance 23-03. And we have the second reading by title only.
Ordinance number 23-03, in the matter of an ordinance adopting amendments to the Clatsop County Land and Water Development and Use Code regarding accessory dwelling units.
Thank you. Is there any additional information from staff?
No, Chair Quillen.
Okay. Clerk of the board, are there any members of the public signed up to speak remotely?
No, there are not.
All right, anyone signed up to speak in person?
No, there's not.
Okay. Therefore, we will go ahead and close the public hearing. Do we have any discussion? Okay. We have a motion.
Move to approve ordinance 2303.
Moved and seconded to approve ordinance number 23-03. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. And that is that. Thank you so much. Now, if they were only that quick. Next is ordinance 23-04, Lawduck Amendments Child Care Facilities on page 74. And again, this is a continuation of public hearing on ordinance 23-04, Lawduck Amendments Child Care Facilities. May we have the second reading by title only?
Ordinance number 23-04, in the matter of an ordinance adopting amendments to the Clatsop County Land and Water Development and Use Code to address family child care homes and child care centers.
Thank you, Anthony. Is there any additional information from staff?
No, sir.
Clerk of the board, are there any members of the public that have signed up to speak?
No, there's not.
Anyone in person?
No, there's not.
Okay. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any discussion? Are you ready for a motion?
Move to approve ordinance 23.
Move and second to approve ordinance number 23-04. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Do we have any other items on the agenda this evening? That is it. Wonderful. All right, anything for the good of the order? We'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.